Welcome back to the course of Introduction into Intercultural Communication. Today's topic is Specifics of Human Communication, Similarities and Differences, Cultural Differences and Relationship. Today with you, Akmaral Orazova, Senior Lecturer of the department. In this lecture we will discuss cultural diversity, communicative style and social interaction, communicative competence and ambiguity, politeness and face, speech communities. All human beings are captives of their culture. Culture is simply a system of models or knowledge about how the world works and a construction of reality that is created, shared, and transmitted by members of a society. Views of everything from the nature of the physical universe to the structure and functioning of society, notions of gender and personhood, and proper ways to people to live with and treat each other are shaped by cultural models. What we come to know, to believe as true or false, indeed our ways of thinking and what we think about are constructs of culture. For example, although the concept of time appears to be a universal view of time and its relationship to task competition differ among cultures. In one view, time is a linear phenomenon that can be managed, measured, and tightly scheduled to get things done. In this view, relationships among those working together on task completion are left to develop incidentally, while primarily emphasis is placed on completing the project on time. In contrast, in cultures where time is viewed as an inherent quality of the task itself or as a complex web that cannot be organized sequentially, people may place more value on developing relationships at the beginning of the shared task. Its successful completion will be a function of the effectiveness of those relationships. Cultures and languages resemble each other and differ in myriad ways. For the purposes of understanding the most general of similarities and differences in communication across cultures, social scientists have identified numerous dimensions of cultural and linguistic variability. Among them, individualism, collectivism, the second, low context, high context communicative style, and the last, symmetrical, asymmetrical social interaction. If we speak about individualism and collectivism, as one might expect, members of cultures based on the ethos of individualism value individual rights and freedoms over group obligations with emphasis on the uniqueness of personal characteristics and goals. Individualism is reflected in interpersonal relationships through a communicative style characterized by relatively forcible expression of personal opinions and emotions, the importance of individual accountability for conflict problems, an outcome-based model of conflict resolution. In contrast, members of cultures based on collectivist principles see themselves as embedded in a social context that subordinates individual characteristics, desires, and interests to the collective good. Collectivism is displayed an interpersonal conflict through expressions of group-centered opinions and ideas, emotions restrained, a tendency to downplay individual responsibility for conflict problems as a process-oriented model of conflict resolution. So, individualistic cultures tend to rely on low-context communicative styles characterized by emphasis on the explicit, linguistically coded information contained in verbal messages, with less attention paid to nonverbal aspects of communication. Interlocutors accustomed to a low-context style tend to express their opinion and ideas directly to avoid ambiguity and evasiveness, to disagree openly and to speak their minds. On the other hand, in collectivistic cultures, where establishing and maintaining social relationships is stressed, considerable attention is paid not only to what is said but also how it is said. Paralinguistic features such as body posture, gestures, facial expressions, and physical distance between interlocutors form significant elements in interpreting verbal messages. Speakers socialized in high-context, collectivistic cultures are comfortable with silence and ambiguity, tend to use words sparingly, and to communicate in ways that are emphatic and indirect. High-context interlocutors assume a relationship in which the listener is expected to intuit the speaker's intent and meaning, where open disagreement and conflict should be avoided.
The context of a situation depends on who you are communicating with, where you are, what you are communicating about, and why you are communicating in the first place. In low context cultures, the way people communicate doesn't vary so much. It tends to be more formal, and people focus on the subject matter rather than the person they are communicating with. In a business setting, problems and differences are often dealt with early on. Once an agreement has been reached, the details are often recorded and written down. In low context cultures, detailed contracts are an essential part of doing business. Once a contract is signed, it can rarely be changed, and it is used to settle any disagreements that might arise in the future. In high context cultures, the focus is on the people involved. Relationships are a key part of communication. When doing business, people remain flexible and change can happen at any time. Problems are often put to one side and only dealt with when absolutely necessary.
Symmetrical asymmetrical social interaction model. Although some societies are marked by symmetrical relationships, with interaction between people of different social status assumed to be based on standards of mutual respect, consultation, and informality. But most societies are characterized by at least some differentiation in social, economical, and political status, hierarchically marked by asymmetrical relationships. Those in high status positions possess authoritarian power and privilege not accorded to those in lower status positions, who are expected to display deference and humility in interactions with their high status superiors. This dimension is particularly important because individuals reproduce their status by the way that they present themselves and engage in communicative interaction. Hierarchically based relationships, in particular, will dictate who will be most likely to give orders, provide explanations or definitions, either criticism or justification, challenge and apologize, request permission, or, in spite of objection, mutely accept someone else's interpretation of an event or situation. As children, we acquire communicative competence, that is, the ability to function and communicate according to models of language, through interactions as speakers and listeners with our parents, families, peers, and other interlocutors within our social world. These competencies provide us with distinctive and diverse ways of organizing and getting on with life. We learn to use language for achieving complex communicative goals that enable us to satisfy needs, understand our physical environment, express opinions and emotions, acquire and share information and ideas, and develop and engage in social relationships. When interlocutors share the same cultural backgrounds and experiences, their communication is facilitated. They are more likely to jump the same conclusion, to come to one conclusion. However, differences in age, gender, education, social position, and culture may impede our ability to draw similar inferences from communicative exchange. For example, even among interlocutors who share knowledge of English, the meaning of yes may vary from of course, definitely so, to maybe I'll think about it. What this means is that we can never completely control the meanings of what we say. Communication is not merely the spoken word, it is the interpreted word. When competent speakers converse, adherence to norms of politeness supersedes even the need for clarity, since maintaining positive social relationships is essential to fruitful communication of information. For example, knowledge of polite greetings provides us with correct forms of address to engage family, friends, or lover, stranger, or colleague, and with productive strategies for engaging in conversation, discussion, and debate.
A linguistic interaction is necessarily a social interaction and consists of external and internal factors. Let's learn more about them. When talking about politeness, the concept of face is very important. The concept of face describes the public self-image. Or in other words, politeness means to know how to be nice, tactful, and modest to other people. Face also means the emotional and social sense of self that everyone has and expects everyone else to recognize. Determining the relative social distance between participants in an interaction is also determining their face one. First example, in a situation where you are socially distant. Second example, in a situation where you are socially.
If a speaker says something that can be interpreted as a possible threat to one's self-public image or face one's, it is called a face-threatening act. The speaker can also say something to lessen the possible threat in a face-saving act. First example, the face-threatening act. Second example, face-saving act. While there are acts that can be either face-threatening or saving, there are also different types of face. Negative face describes the need to be independent, freedom of action, and not being imposed by others. Positive face Keeping those types of faces in mind, we can differentiate between negative and positive politeness. Negative politeness describes a face-saving act oriented to a person's negative face, and positive politeness describes a face-saving.
We will now see how to get a pen from someone else using different kinds of approaches. First of all, the say nothing. Without uttering a word, you have the intention that your problem will be recognized. If those needs are recognized, more has been communicated than is said. On the contrary, The say something approach contains off and on-record expressions. Off-record expressions do not directly address the other, like in this example. On-record expressions, on the other hand, directly address the other. The most direct approaches are also known as bold on record. You can, however, also use mitigating expressions that soften the demand, like in the next example.
Before even making an utterance, you can use pre-sequences to avoid the risk of losing face. Therefore, you can provide an opportunity for the other to halt the potentially risky act. This can be achieved through pre-request, pre-invitation, or pre-announcement. Your partner can signal you to stop or go ahead before you make the actual request, invitation, or announcement. Pre-requests are produced before making a request and allows to avoid requests that cannot be granted at that time, such as in this example. Pre-invitations are commonly used in making invitations by asking a pre-invitation question, like our vampire does it. Pre-announcements are often used by children to check their parents' attention, like little Timmy does it to annoy his mother.
Strategies that facilitate approximation of a speech community include: first, developing a shared vocabulary; second, establishing collaborative dialogue; and the third, managing conflict. About the first one, a shared vocabulary. A group of people can build a speech community using the communicative exchange that emerge from their daily dealings with one another. Depending upon participants' cultural background, these behaviors might include keeping generalizations about cultural differences in mind, listening actively and emphatically using cues such as head nods or quiet murmurs to signal attentiveness or respect, accepting longer pauses and reflecting silence between speakers' turns, giving time before responding for throughout and open consideration of others' communicative styles, addressing concerns about problems and conflicting views to the whole group or subgroup rather than singling out one person, paraphrasing in participants' own words that what others are taught to have said in order to check understanding and get clarification, modulating degrees of directness in asking for clarification and giving feedback, paying attention to both in verbal and nonverbal content of communication. Human communication is never perfectly effective. The receiver usually does not decode a message into exactly the same meaning that the source had in mind when encoding the message. So a code is a classification such as a language used by individuals to categorize their experience and to communicate it to others. And decoding is the process by which the physical message is converted into an idea by the receiver. Encoding is the process by which an idea is converted into a message by a source. We cannot forget about the noise. Noise can interfere with the transmission of a message. Noise is anything that hinders the communication process among participants. Perhaps the symbol that was communicated was interpreted differently by the receiver than by the source. When the source and the receiver do not share a common value regarding the message content, effective communication is unlikely to occur, leading to conflict. The more dissimilar the source and receiver, the more likely that the communication will be ineffective. A source is the individual who originates a message by encoding an idea into a message. A receiver is the individual who decodes a communication message by converting it into an idea. A channel is the means by which a message is transmitted from its origin to its destination. And feedback. Feedback is a message about the effects of a perceived message that is sent back to the source. So, what do we mean by feedback? Feedback, that is, the words we speak and the gestures we make, have no meaning in themselves. Rather, they achieve significance. When we use symbols such as words and gestures to communicate, we assume that the other person shares our symbol system. If we tell someone to sit down, we assume that the individual knows what these two words mean. Also, the symbolic meaning are conveyed both verbally and non-verbally. Thousands of non-verbal behaviors, gestures, postures, eye movements, facial expressions involve shared meaning. Here is an example. During business negotiations, an American businessman in Saudi Arabia set a cross from his Saudi host showing soles of his feet, which was an insult in Saudi society, and inquired about the health of his wife, which was an inappropriate topic, and turned down the offer of a tea, which is a rude act. Because of this insult, the business deal was never completed. So we can draw a conclusion that communication is dynamic. It is not a single event, but it is ongoing, so that communication are at once both senders and receivers. When we are communicating with a person, we take a message through our senses of sight, smell, hearing, and those messages do not happen at one time, but rather simultaneously. We are communicating, we are creating, maintaining, or sharing meaning. This implies that people are actively involved in the communication process. Communication is also a process involving several components. People who are communicating, a message that is being communicated, verbal or non-verbal, a channel through which the communication takes place, and a context. That are the main elements in the communication process through which participants create and share information with one another in order to reach a mutual understanding. Communication is receiver-oriented. Human communication is never perfectly effective. By the end of the lecture, be ready to discuss the review questions.